I gave away 100 gold every time I blamed my team in PvP. Sure, that can be kind of funny to watch me struggle to give commentary on a situation that clearly needs no explanation, but the real reason I did this was to improve my mindset. You'll see this very often when watching a competitive team-oriented livestream. They'll die for whatever reason and immediately look at their team and blame them, or look to blaming some sort of mechanic that's overpowered or uninteractive. But they still get the buff. I don't know what my team is doing. Oof. Okay, that's 100G. Obviously, these are all valid reasons for explaining your death, but are they helpful? No one is perfect, and even if you play very well, there's always something you could improve. You could be blaming others, or you could be focusing on how to improve yourself, because that's what you have control of. In this video, I'll be getting at why we constantly blame others and how you can get into a competitive mindset to not only improve yourself, but to also be able to interpret what needs to be improved. First, I suggest that you get some sort of recording software. I use OBS or Open Broadcast software, and so does many other content creators. You can also figure out how to use Shadowplay if you have that built into your graphics card, but OBS is free and has more customizability. It's always important to be able to look at your own gameplay and analyze what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. You can't do that properly while you're in the moment. It's nice to have a recording for later. There are some things that just aren't easily quantified, like how many points you let the enemy team get because you were fighting on their node for so long. Even if you eventually win, how long did they get value out of holding it? Or how many points did you get your team by flipping the entire map from snowballing a team fight? Clearly it's situational, and valuing your decision based on its outcomes is taking a lot of things for granted. You really need to be your own greatest critic, but you also have to be careful looking at old footage because you have much more information than your past self had at the time, such as how each and every situation would play out. If you aren't careful, you can fall for a hindsight bias, which is a logical fallacy. Basically, hindsight bias is to make conclusions or judgments about an action or decision based on the knowledge of the event that you gained after that action or decision was made. For example, I look at the weather forecast and it says 40% chance of rain, and I tell someone it's likely to rain. Then after it does rain, I exclaim how I knew it would rain. Well, no, you didn't know. You were told by people who are more knowledgeable than you on the topic. Then you have the uncertainty of weather forecasts. People tend to tunnel vision on their current perspective because, to be honest, it's just easier to do that. It takes a lot more effort to consider every perspective, even your past perspective, without bias, and come to a conclusion that isn't necessarily convenient for you. We are very prone to this kind of thinking because we all have an ego. Basically, your ego is your identity and your motivation for self-preservation. It's a good thing most of the time because it keeps you alive. You can argue the extent to which we are selfish, but generally most of our actions are aimed at preserving or improving ourselves. Why then do we try to convince ourselves and others of things that aren't accurate or aren't necessarily true? Why do we blame others? You know when Blizzard banned that Hearthstone player for supporting Hong Kong and then blamed the player for it? They were completely justified in banning them. You want to appeal to as wide an audience as possible, and you don't want to get in trouble with the Chinese government who would cut their program, but they should have just said that. Instead of admitting to their greed, they blamed the player. It is easier and more rewarding in the short term for them, and that is how our brains work. But that doesn't mean it has to be a bad thing. We can balance the ego to be an informed confidence, because if we are second guessing ourselves every decision and every action we take, we wouldn't get much done. Your ego needs to match your level of power. For example, if you're President of the United States, you need to have a pretty big ego or you won't be able to help the people who need you to take action. That doesn't mean that you make all the decisions yourself. The president doesn't know everything, which is why they have many advisors and make decisions based on the judgment of those advisors. So you should be humble when you are beyond your power and confident when you're within your powers. But wait. Hold up. How does this all relate to the video game that I just played for fun? It has to do with improving your interactions with your own power level regardless of how powerful you are. Making smart decisions based on tuning your ego down when you're in too deep, or tuning it up when action is required, can make up for a lack of experience or an unfavorable situation. But if you're overestimating or underestimating your abilities, you'll often find yourself frustrated and blaming others. When you can find the right balance of humility and confidence, you'll be able to more accurately diagnose what went wrong, and from there, fixing it is so much easier. This is why I tend to prefer staying on the humbler side, because as I've mentioned before, you can only change yourself. When I put a high bounty of 100G for blaming my team, it helped to rewire my instinct of self-preservation. Because intuition is much faster than our logical faculties, we often come to conclusions before we even think about them. And then, when we're in a situation where we have to explain these intuitions, as we often are in social situations, we come up with reasons to confirm those intuitions, even if the intuition is wrong. This is called a confirmation bias. So to really be in control of your thoughts, you need to separate your intuitions from your judgments and conclusions. You can use those intuitions as a starting point, but just remember, you're not the protagonist. That's why it's important to create some sort of punishment or incentive to go beyond your instinct, like I did by punishing myself by giving away 100 gold. As a veteran player, I probably can blame my team most of the time and be right, and it will feel good, and it will help me move on with as little thought as possible. But losing 100G is much more painful and much harder to recuperate than a single match worth of accountability. Because my team is off limits, I force myself to be hypercritical even for the smallest improvements that I could make. Maybe I could have survived if I didn't miss that CC a minute ago, which cost me another cooldown, which required me to use that kiting spot, which I fumbled to get up, which eventually I did not survive. Usually what is better than blaming your team for being deficient is judging their presence. If you commit to a 2v2 and die in it because your teammate isn't providing enough presence, is it their fault for not playing well? Or is it yours for expecting more from a player who you could have analyzed further and decided how safe to play around them, or whether or not to even engage in a fight with them? When you look at it that way, there's room for improvement. Try to find solutions to problems rather than excuses to them. You should always play as aggressively or as confidently as you can, but no further than the point to which it isn't worth it. If you end up dying because you're trying to be the protagonist and overextending further than the episode list of the entire Naruto anime, you should probably play safer next time. Make a habit out of blaming yourself rather than your team, because you have to live with yourself, not with that teammate who you may never see again, who is probably not even paying attention while they watch mature websites in their other screen. So why not improve yourself? As a content creator, I'm constantly going over my own footage and reliving my mistakes. If you aren't your own biggest critic, then you're putting your improvement in the hands of people who care less about it than you. This is the irony of the ego. You want to preserve yourself, but in doing so, you can hold yourself back from becoming better and therefore being better at preserving yourself. So while the ego is a good thing, it needs to be balanced based on your power level. Another shortcoming of the ego is greed. Greed is trying to get more than your fair share of reward, trying to get more than you are capable of achieving, or trying to use less resources than are necessary to get the job done. Greed is an important aspect of risk versus reward gameplay. If you don't play riskily, you'll not get as much of a reward and fall behind. But if you play too riskily, you can be punished and lose more than you gain. The biggest misplay is letting your greed take priority and focusing on the reward of winning. One of my favorite metaphors is the ancient Chinese proverb that if you chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch none. Understanding what your win condition is and focusing on that and nothing more can help you to make better decisions. If AFKing at a node is enough to win the game, then that is what you should do. If you only need to catch 1 rabbit to win, then focus on catching the first rabbit. If you let one of the rabbits go because you focus too much on the other, that's still better than getting nothing. But if your win condition is to get both rabbits, then just focusing on one is a bad play. You'll need to go all or nothing and get creative to capture both. If you fail, at least you attempted to win rather than settled for losing. This is also why I never give up. You can always learn from those seemingly impossible situations, and sometimes when you make that comeback, it feels so rewarding. At least if you're playing for competition, that is. If you really want that reward, you may settle for blaming others as soon as that reward no longer seems obtainable. Extrinsic rewards can be a good motivation for competition, but thinking I need to win and playing to win are completely different. If you don't deserve to win, then you shouldn't care that you lost. Also, if you learn or improve, that should be the real reward because now you're more capable of winning in the future. So a close match that you lose can often be much more meaningful. Titles or fame or bragging rights can be nice, but once you've got them, they can distract you from the things they represent, which are skill, strategy, or teamwork. Once you get comfortable with your skill level, you stop trying to improve and start blaming others. Many people really do want to improve, but they aren't strict enough with their statistics to really gain any meaning out of them. If you play one match, lose, and say your build is bad, you probably haven't gotten good at the build, might have had an unlucky matchup, or just an impossible match. I would stay away from calling matches uncarryable or unwinnable because that kind of thinking removes your accountability, and instead of blaming your team, you're blaming free will. They'll also perform terribly biased logic, like support doesn't carry, so you shouldn't play support if you want to climb. Well, no, that's wrong because actually a good support can hard carry a match, and often the misconception here is that when your DPS players aren't doing their role, it's better for you to be doing it. But then you would have no one doing the support role, and it could be potentially worse. There is a trade-off to everything, and when you add one thing to the equation, you always remove it elsewhere. I hate to break it to those people, but you may not be a good support player, so lay off the protagonist syndrome and focus on performing your role before you try to do everyone else's. You can also see this kind of representative bias when people only criticize their gameplay when looking over matches where they won. If you only perform well when you're on the winning team, then I wonder what your gameplay or rotations look like when you're on the losing team. I would be very skeptical of someone who has a 100% win ratio. You need a decent, unbiased sample size to be able to really make any conclusions. As I said before, close matches that you lose are the most meaningful because you can much more readily find places you could have made a difference. I get a lot of comments on YouTube saying, "This build is bad," or "Just get to the point, I don't need a 1-hour video to say that," and stuff like that. But do I take offense to it? Enough of it can certainly add up, but I put it in perspective to all the positive comments I also get. Understanding statistics can often help you handle reality because our minds are by design very flawed and meant for making quick decisions, not necessarily good decisions. Anyways, if you like this kind of discussion, like and subscribe for more. Also consider becoming a patron to support me. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, Leave a comment below other ways to help you improve or get in the competitive mindset, or maybe you just want to blame me for your teammates who weren't paying attention because they were listening to this video. Either way, let me know if this was helpful. And don't give me the "it's just a game" routine. Dude, I just like to go home from a hard day of work and pop off in some cues. I don't need a psychology course, bro. Most of you have already admitted to being competitive or looking to improve. It isn't fun being dead all the time, and you aren't improving by constantly blaming others. Wait, a decent amount are also just here for rewards? Well, I guess you can't win them all.